Hello, everybody, and welcome to our IGT Sunday Conversation series. My name is Justin Prim. If you haven't joined us for one of these conversations before, welcome. Thanks for being here. This is our 5th week in a row of doing this under the IGT banner. We've had some great conversations so far, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation. So if you guys don't know about the conversations, we're doing this every Sunday. We had Richard Hughes last week. We're going to have Laura from Tatum Gems here next week. But tonight, we're going to have some fun with Jason Marchiafava. So Jason's a buddy of mine. He lives here in Bangkok. So we're actually just going to be talking from across the city here in Bangkok. But Jason's a jeweler from America. He's worked for many places before, including Tiffany's. We're going to see some of his stuff tonight, see some of what he does, and, get all of our questions answered. So looks like we got fair few people here tonight from different parts of the world. Welcome. I see we got Belgium. I don't know where everybody else is coming from tonight, but thanks for being here. And yeah, I guess we can go ahead and get started. So Jason, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Welcome. Hi.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
How's it going tonight in
Pretty good,
Bangkok?
pretty good.
So
Amazing.
how have you been holding up or holding up maybe during the last few weeks? Have you been here in Bangkok this whole time?
Yeah, I have. I've been pretty bored in my condo, but learning all kinds of video editing stuff and techniques and doing a lot of renderings and drawings and paintings and that kind of stuff.
Cool. And so I'm thinking you don't have any of your actual jewelry tools here in Bangkok, right? You don't have a studio set up to be making anything right now, huh?
No, I don't actually make anything in Thailand. I just come here and hang out with you guys.
Cool. Well, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, could you give us a little bit of a introduction and background into kind of who you are and eventually how did you get to Bangkok?
Sure. Um, So, as you said, my name is Jason Marchiafava. I grew up in the jewelry industry. I started when I was very, very young, and dove pretty deep into manufacturing and hand fabrication and say high jewelry techniques and pretty much all around manufacturing, in and out of factories and small shops pretty much my whole life. Um, I love doing it. There isn't anything else in this world that I would rather do other than, say, cut and shape metal. That's definitely my first passion, and jewelry stuff is really that's my thing.
And so how long have you been into this idea of hand fabricating and hand engraving?
So December will be my 30th anniversary.
30th.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
next December.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So a long time. Okay. Well, let's just jump straight into it. So, one of when we first met, which I think was like, what, more than a year ago now here in Bangkok, or
Yeah,
was
it's a
it even
little
long, maybe even longer than that? I remember one of the first conversations that we had, we were talking about, just different techniques and stuff. And you gave me this analogy of like, you know, how you can find like so many pieces of jewelry from ancient times, Renaissance and medieval, and even before that. But and a lot of the ones that we see in museums are still in really, really good shape, considering the fact that they're 500 plus years old. But you said to me, there's a good chance that even your like mother's engagement ring wouldn't even last that, it wouldn't even look that good, maybe even in 100 years. And we started
yeah.
talking about the differences between casting and hand fabricating, which at that time I had really no idea what, I mean, I knew that there was a difference, but I didn't understand that there was a longevity difference. So could you just could we talk a little bit about that? I'm really curious. And who knows, maybe some people in the audience might not even agree with that. Maybe if we have some divergent opinions, we can hear those too. But I would love to hear your take on this idea as a fabricator and somebody who is making the stuff from hand, not from casting. How you see the difference?
Sure. So I think if we go back in time a little bit, if we rewind, I mean, casting has been done for thousands of years for sure. But I would say, like any kind of evolution of manufacture or making, um, over time, as skills became better and as things, say technologies have evolved, um, handmade techniques, up until the 1950s, until they perfected dental investment. Dental investment is the main, say, manufacturing cause for mass manufacturing of cast products today. Up until
Okay.
that point, it was either fabricated or it was die struck, for the most part. There are some other few techniques in there, but for the most part, that was the majority of what was manufactured. When you look at pieces that have been die struck or fabricated, the density of metal is the difference. When you die strike precious metals, it changes the molecular structure of the metal, and it allows you to push it thinner and into a higher detail than you can with, say, cast pieces. If you look at cast pieces under electron microscope, it sort of looks like Swiss cheese. The density and the hardness isn't there as compared to, say, milled or wrought forged metals. And die striking is a form of forging, essentially. It's
Yeah.
just forged inside of a die. And when you look at pieces from, say, the 1920s, platinum pieces, where they're very intricate, fine, say, filigree wire work and very ornate flowers and things, and either the detail, fast forwarding, till today, is superb. Where you can see, we get maybe 30 years out of a cast platinum engagement ring now before you have to start changing heads, fixing prongs, rebuilding shanks. White gold, it's less. You get anywhere between 10 to 20 years out of a white gold setting, as compared to, platinum's a little bit longer, but that same platinum today compared to the platinum that was used historically in die struck pieces, it's not comparable.
Okay. And so die struck just means basically the metal is hot and it's between two molds basically, and it's kind of smashes them together into the mold.
So it's done cold,
Oh, cold. Okay.
but you have what's called a hub, and the hub has whatever shank or head or motif carved into it. You have a negative and you have a positive die, and cold, either in the form of sheet or bar, is placed into it, and it's stamped under a great amount of pressure. Usually, say 50-ton press is fairly standard, and then it comes out, and then you cut the pieces out of the sheet, and that really dense forged metal is that's how they made the parts to build those rings that you see that are, these beautiful
Okay.
antique pieces. But the hardness of that metal and the density of it is really what is the cause for the crisp detail that you see 100 years later.
Okay. And so, and I know this isn't a technique that's used anymore, right? The die struck. This is been replaced by lost wax casting.
It is used, but not, it's just a fraction of what it was. I would say if you looked at a scale, 95% is some sort of a lost wax casting process. Maybe 5% there's some component, heads and certain parts that are, still die struck today. And there's a few antique companies that still continue to produce their dies today, but it's very few.
Okay. And somebody was just asking, I'm gonna pop in the questions as they come if it makes
Sure.
sense. Somebody just asked, what about modifying castings by hammering? Would that extend the life because you're work hardening the surface of the metal?
So you can harden castings by even magnetic tumbling, things like that, but it's still very different. When you die strike precious metals under, say, 50 tons plus, it changes the molecular structure of the metal. The actual grain boundaries in the metal change at that point. Um, and if you look at a scale, you have, you got to think of it like kind of like resolution on a computer screen almost, where you have casting where you have the pixels are kind of, they're more spread out, and there are some that are missing, there's some voids. And then you have, say, milled metal that you're going to fabricate with. Those are denser, say 4K. As far as, all the pixels are aligned, they're all bright, they're all, very small gaps between the grain boundaries of the metal. And then you have die struck. Die struck is like 8K. It's a different thing. You can harden your castings, but it's never going to be die struck.
Yeah.
Hardness it can't be achieved.
And so how old is die struck technique? That's relatively recent, right? Like 20th century,
Yeah, I would say maybe,
late 1800s.
oh, I mean, I've seen, the most rudimentary, say, beginnings of it are like Roman coins and coin rings.
Okay.
They're struck, but as far as actually mass manufacturing, and it has to do with, say, high carbon tool steel, and they started making hubs and dies out of high carbon tool steel. I would guess maybe late 1800s, early 1900s would be when, I guess, mainstream jewelry manufacturing and, say, the higher, finer qualities really started picking that up and running.
Okay. And so this was basically the first kind of labor-saving technique that the jewelry industry had after, of course, a really long history of fabrication. And then they went into lost wax casting, which is what predominantly we see now here in Thailand and other jewelry hubs of the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. After the 1950s, they introduced this the formula for the investment powder into the dental industry. And over the course of, say, 20 or 30 years, it really went from, say, small scale to really large scale as far as manufacturing jewelry is concerned, because you could achieve a certain level of detail that you couldn't achieve with, say, sand casting.
Okay. And so another question, somebody had asked, laser welding, is it dense or is it soft, or how does that fall into the spectrum?
So it depends really on the type of metal that you're laser welding. The laser welders themselves, they shoot a beam of light that's roughly about 6,000 degrees. That 6,000 degrees on, say, silver is very different than 6,000 degrees on platinum. Also, how you weld your joints is really important as well. If you are just tacking the surface, it's not going to penetrate in any kind of depth. If you have, say, you cut like a V channel into what you're going to weld and you fill it, it can be really, really good. I do know that a lot of people, almost all the laser welders are set up to accept argon gas as a cover gas, but argon is not only a cover gas. For things like white gold and for silver, argon actually changes the brittleness of the weld that's happening. Silver can be extremely brittle, and white gold can be extremely brittle. Rose gold can be extremely brittle as well.
Okay. And that's just from the mixture of the metals.
Yeah, it's so hot.
Okay.
6,000 degrees, whatever it's hitting on those metals, it's just frying them.
Okay. And somebody had wondered, isn't the lower density arising from inappropriate casting parameters, which, cause this porosity? Or is that a
No,
different thing?
no, it is a different thing. Even with the best quality castings that are available today, it has to do with the metal going from molten to solid. If you look at metal close enough, there's actual grains inside of the metal. It's the crystal structure. I mean, gemstones have them too. It's just different, right?
Yeah.
That crystalline structure that's inside of it, the gaps between the crystals themselves are physically larger on cast metals than they are on compressed die striking or milled products.
Yeah. And that's basically what work hardening means, right? When you hit metal a bunch
Yeah,
of times and it squeezes the molecules together and then they get really, really hard. So that's
right. Now think about, wire. If you take and you melt a ball of metal and you run it through a rolling mill and you crush it down and you stretch it really long, now you're taking all those crystalline structures and you're pulling it almost like wood grain, right? So which is stronger, something that has this fibrous wood grain type stretched, cellular structure to it, or, beforehand. It's
Yeah.
much more dense.
Okay.
Much more hard.
And so basically, just to kind of summarize the idea of wax casting, so we all have a really good idea about what it is, because I really want to compare this to the differences of what is fabricating. So basically, in wax casting, someone's going to carve their whole piece or a piece of the jewelry out of wax, and it's going to go
Yeah,
into a machine that's basically going to melt the wax in a mold and replace that wax with gold, silver, or platinum, or whatever.
exactly.
Okay.
When you're carving a wax, you're carving the void that's going to eventually be inside of this, say, ceramic like plaster of Paris like material. It burns away, and then you pour liquid metal into it, and it fills that void, capturing a good amount of the detail that's there.
And so the benefit of that technique is the fact that you can have 100 rings on one casting tree at the same time, so you don't have to hand make or even die strike 100 rings in a row. It's really pretty fast.
It's repeatable.
Yeah.
If I'm going to hand make the same repeatable piece, every one is going to be different. They're
Yeah.
all going to have dimensional differences and weight differences. I mean, you can get pretty close, but it's much more difficult to do one at a time rather than, if you take a wax carving and pull a mold, from either a casting or the wax itself, and then you have a mold you can inject multiple times within, a very small parameter of error or difference.
Okay. So we have a pretty good idea about die striking and wax casting, lost wax casting. So tell us about fabrication. I know the one thing that I do know is the fabrication is probably the oldest technique, right?
Yeah.
And so,
So fabrication is basically the creation of any piece of jewelry from just raw sheet and wire stock. And then from there, it's sculpted, cut, filed, melted, soldered, welded to form the finished piece of jewelry.
okay. So this is a similar idea to like a woodworker taking a tree and carving it up, cutting it up, and making, legs and flat pieces to make boards and building a table from a tree,
Yeah,
as opposed
yeah.
to
Or similar to, say, custom motorcycles, where they take and they fabricate the frame from tubing,
yeah.
That type.
And so I pulled a couple photos off your website so we can share this, a little bit of this, what this process looks like. So this is one of the pieces that you had made. And so this pretty much shows exactly what you just said, right? So walk us through this a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you a little bit about the piece. So the pearls, there's 4 pearls in this piece. 3 of them are Kohut pearls. They're extremely rare. And then the large pink one is a conch pearl. It's extremely rare as well.
Okay.
The piece that was built around them it's all platinum and diamonds, and it was all made from milled stock that I made as well. I made wire, I made sheet, and then I cut the parts out of sheet and wire. There's an incredible amount of hours that went into this piece. There's also handmade screws that hold the pearls from behind so that they're removable if you ever have to clean or work on the piece.
So this is a pretty high-tech piece.
Yeah.
And so milled stock means you've bought a piece of metal, you've melted it, you've flattened it, you've rolled it through the roller to make a plate, a sheet, and then you cut that up
Exactly.
and make stuff like this. And
Exactly.
so you're basically building a structure, and we can really see what the structure looks like. It's really 3D here. It's really got some depth, and you're obviously drilling bits and sawing bits and doing all the things that you do to make them beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Now,
so, yeah.
So I was just going to say, in relation to gemstones, I mean, this piece, it took about a year to build this piece, and somewhere around maybe 1,000 hours.
Wow.
The picture on the top right is actually the screwdriver putting the screw into the frame. Now, to put any kind of, say, effort into a piece, like this, even though I have that much work and that much time and that much energy and investment around it, all of it fails to compare to what the actual center stones are. Everything that I do is made to enhance the center stones and the value of the center stones. It's secondary. All my fabrication work is secondary to the gemstone, whatever that might be. And it's got to be relative, right?
Yeah.
So
So you're not going to build a year-long piece to go around, a pale amethyst or something like that. It's got to be,
no,
it's got to be the highest level of nature to go with the highest level of man's creation or whatever.
yeah. But 3 of the 4 pearls, there's only a handful of them ever found of this size and quality.
Okay. And
They're
so
they're rare.
were the pearls for this piece already yours, or this belonged to a customer?
So my business partner spent a few years actually um, at the time acquiring the pearls. We had 3 of the 4, and then we were sitting around one day in the shop and looking at the pearls, and we're like, "Shit, what should we do with them?" And he's like, "The the top one's spectacular. It's Quahog pearl." He was like, "Should we make a ring with this? What should we do? Think about it." And I was like, "Man, we should put all of them into a necklace." And he was like, "Whoa, that's a great idea. Let's do that." So I went home, and the rendering is on the bottom right. The rendering, I started doodling around. It wasn't refined at that time, but I started doodling around with it. And then I brought it in the next day. And I was like, check this out. So we sat around and we talked through it and talked about it and how we wanted to do it and what we wanted to do. And then we ended up sourcing the one on the bottom, the little bullet shape that dangles from the bottom.
Okay.
And that was it, man. We were kind of off and running.
Wow. So this is truly like a one of a kind piece. Aside from the hours that you put into the metalwork, like the collection of the pearls are probably never going to be able to come together like that again.
Yeah, there's very very few of them ever found of that size and quality.
Wow.
Probably a handful of Quahog pearls and a couple conch pearls that are even comparable.
Okay. And so somebody asked, where's this piece now?
So the last that I heard, it's available.
Huh.
I think I'm not 100% sure. Last I heard, it was sold, and then I think someone may have passed away, and then it was sold again. I'm not sure.
Okay. So there's already a bit of a story behind this piece. That's
Yeah.
interesting. So when you know that you're going to work on such an epic project, I mean, to me as a gem cutter, and I think about cutting the same stone for 1 year, this is like my worst nightmare. So, so if I'm thinking about starting a project that potentially is going to take a year or whatever, how do you psych yourself up to start that, or do you just not think about that depth?
So that's a really good question. When I was learning to engrave, I spent some time in Italy, and people that I studied with in Italy they're at a whole different level. Like, I'm not sure if they're human or if they were from what planet they're actually from. Um, but you can actually see the father and daughter are on Instagram, Francesca and Firmo Fracassi. They're literally like the top engravers to ever walk planet Earth. Michelangelo level stuff, crazy.
Wow.
Um, but when I met them and when I saw their work, the stuff that they were doing, I mean, we're talking 2,000 hours into a project, 6 years, to complete a shotgun receiver. And I just looked at it and I was like, maybe I should just quit and do something different. How am I ever going to get there? So what happened was, after that, and I'll never forget, one of the guys that I was over there, I asked him how long it took him to do it. And his reply was, "How long does it take to engrave a shotgun?" And his reply was, "A good one." And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "You can't really engrave and finish an engraving in less than 400 hours. And that just like hit me like a truck. And I was like, okay, 400 hours. Let's see, there's 160 hours in a normal month's work. When I returned, I had my first 500-hour project to do, and it was the most difficult thing of my life, mainly because of the amount of time it took to complete. By the time I finished it, it was one of the, say my biggest accomplishments at that time. But what I realized was when you get into the big, really, really crazy, say museum quality stuff, it all comes down to the number of hours that you're commissioned to put into it. Gemstone cutting, it's a different, say it's a different thing because you always go into the project knowing the number of facets that you have to make on the piece before you start cutting it, right? Or at least within plus or minus, whatever.
Yeah.
With jewelry, because you're taking, basically starting with wire and sheet, and sometimes you're actually making the wire and the sheet. You need to be prepared to put as many facets as needed to cross the finish line, right?
Yeah.
Patience has been my biggest struggle in this whole thing, is to be able to sit down and be disciplined enough to actually walk through a project of this magnitude from start to finish. And it all came from seeing these people, spend 1,000, 2,000 hours on a piece, and, trying to figure out how they do it. And hopefully someday I could, discipline myself to sit down for that long to do.
Yeah. And so for a piece like this, do mistakes happen along the way? Do you have to scrap some bits and start over and sometimes, or are you past that?
At this point in my career, I'm fairly past that. There are some things that, so I always render to scale. And while I'm rendering, that's the drawing, the design on the bottom right.
Yeah.
While I'm doing that, I'm actually thinking through how I'm going to make the piece. So that's kind of like my pre-planning engineering stage,
Okay.
where, I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, so I got this chain. How am I going to build the links? What's the thickness wire I'm going to use? How am I going to go about doing it? And then each segment, I kind of have a pretty solid plan before I dive into it. For the whole point that you just made, I don't want to remake pieces.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to scrap stuff and redo it. So for the most part, I walk through it slow enough that I don't really hose anything too bad. I mean, on rare occasion, there might be a few small bumps in the road, but it's usually nothing that I can't recover from.
Okay. And so a couple of people have already asked, how do you price something like this? Well, specifically, how much was this one sold for? But how can you even put a dollar figure? This is my part of the question. How can you put a dollar figure on something that takes 1,000 hours to make?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hours. You charge for your hours. Then there's the actual prices of the pearls. I don't feel comfortable mentioning it here, but it was definitely it's an expensive piece.
Okay. And can you tell us again what were the types of pearls? Two people asked that one.
Yeah, so the large pink one is a conch pearl.
Conch, okay.
So anything over 2 carats in a fine quality of conch pearl is considered rare. That one's like, I believe, I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but I think it was 40 carats.
Wow.
The other 3 pearls are quahog pearls. They're from the quahog clam, and that's the same clam that they make New England clam chowder out of.
How do you spell that?
Most people, Quahog, maybe.
Okay.
Um,
Family guy.
Most people don't realize that those clams make pearls, but they do. They're just really, really rare.
Okay. And so I'm going to put that into the chat because somebody asked me to write it out so they can
Yeah.
look it up. Okay. And what about the bullet one? That was also another type?
It's a quahog as well.
Okay.
It's the smallest one on the bottom. It was around 6 carats.
Okay. And so, okay, so we kind of have an idea about the fabrication. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about in this talk was we know, at least I know as a person who loves old jewelry and even going back into medieval and Renaissance stuff, which I've looked at a lot. I've pulled up a couple photos, well, a couple of photos of that you sent me from your workbench, but also comparing to some photos that I found historically, just to talk about how little has changed, or maybe you can tell us from just from looking at the pictures. So here we can see on the right, this is your workbench in, was this is in North Carolina?
Nashville,
Nashville,
Tennessee.
sorry. So in we got your 2019 studio in Nashville, and then we've got the Renaissance guys in the 1570s. Now I know this picture's maybe not that huge for you, but can you kind of just notice on the Renaissance photo and see, like, are they pretty much still using the same hand tools and stuff that you're using now, other than of course um, electric engravers or electric torches,
Yeah.
furnaces?
So yeah, so if you see the guy all the way on the left, he's
Okay.
got a wheel that he's turning. That
Okay.
wheel that he's turning is pulling wire. He's
Okay.
hand pulling wire. Now you can't see that on my workbench. It's on a table off on the other side of the room, but it's basically it's the same thing. It's called a draw table. It's for making wire.
Okay.
To his left and above his head are some pliers and cutters.
Yeah.
As you can see, there's pretty much the same pliers and cutters on my bench as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I see the
on the
anvil
table,
here. You've got the anvil here.
yep,
Same anvil shape.
yep.
Okay.
Now, but because they don't have a torch, they're actually using the fireplace. What he's got in his hand, he's annealing, either annealing or say fusing together parts, depending on what they're actually making.
Okay.
But directly behind him, he's got, there's pliers and hammers on the walls.
Yeah.
Again, it's all the same. That's on my bench. The guy sitting around at the table, there's a guy with a hammer and chisel in his hand. He's doing, I'm not sure what he's doing. He's doing something. But across the table, and say closest to us, there's a guy with a hammer and chisel. He's doing some chasing work on something. It's done exactly the same today. The catch tray apron on the guy, yeah, that guy there.
Yeah.
It's the same that I use. It's just mine's wood and metal.
Yeah. But a lot of
I've
people
used the
still
leather.
use like a leather.
Yeah.
It's usually leather, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that even hasn't changed. Yours is a little bit different, but many jewelers are still using a leather one that sits on their lap like that.
Yep. In the very far back to the left of the window, there's some gravers down there.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, right in there. Again, I still use exactly the same things to do exactly the same thing.
So basically the biggest difference is you've got a gas-powered torch to do all of your annealing and heating and stuff. And of course
yep,
we can
and
see,
electric drill.
and yeah, you've got an electric motor mounted thing over here for,
Yep.
Okay. And so I got a few more. I don't think we'll catch so many. The other ones aren't as detailed, but this is 100 years later, and we can kind of see, okay, essentially all the same stuff, just in a little bit different of a layout.
Yeah, what that guy's forging on is the same as how I would do it on my anvil. Again, the guy's got the fireplace back there that he's cooking something for either annealing, melting, or fusing. And then behind him, it looks like they're doing chasing and repoussé in the studio.
Okay. And so what this guy's doing here, he's basically taking his plate and trying to flatten it out, thin it out, do you think? Is that what
Yeah,
you
he's trying to make it thinner and longer.
Okay. So that's a pretty,
yeah.
And even if we would look into like blacksmithing and forging, they're going to be pretty much doing the same thing as well, heating up metal, hitting it on an anvil.
And just based on the picture, if you look at the guy behind the counter, he's holding some kind of a dish or some kind of a tray in his hand. I would imagine that this is a silversmithing shop where they made, say, like tea sets and things. So
Yeah.
he's taking a billet of silver and he's making plate. And then after that, it goes into the oven. They cook it to make it soft. And then they send it over to the guy to chase and repose the ornaments, is what I think that we're seeing in this picture. And I think the guy standing behind the counter, I think he's polishing, probably by hand.
Okay. And so how does polishing by hand work, do you think, in this ancient time, just with some kind of cloth?
Yeah, so it would be cloth and pumice and probably some kind of animal fat.
Okay, interesting. And then the last one I found, this is the most recent one that well, I didn't try to look for any modern ones, but here we can see your whole desk with all of the tools pulled out. And
Yeah,
we can pretty much see the same stuff that we've been seeing on all those pictures. And even the shape of the desk is quite similar, so you can kind of get in there and have your workspace.
yeah.
Um, and if I'm seeing correctly, does he even have, I forget what this thing's called that you use to hold
Bench pin.
the bench pin. Is this exactly what he's doing here as well, or is he doing something else?
Yes.
So
No, it's the same.
yeah. So pretty much we can at least go back, at least from these photos, we can see we can go back at least to the Renaissance and nothing has changed. We probably can go back even a little bit earlier. I'm not totally sure. All the pictures I could find before the 1500s, you can't really see what's going on because of the way that they did paintings back then. But
Right.
so yeah, this to me, this is really interesting. The fact, but if we would go into one of the wax casting places in Bangkok today, we wouldn't necessarily see all this stuff in the casting section, but in the people that are finishing the work, they're still using pretty much some of the same tools, right?
Yes, they're using the same tools, but just to do a different process. You know, they're taking parts that are already created and essentially making the surfaces smooth, the shapes right, and then they're sending them to polish and to setting.
Okay, and maybe occasionally they might solder a couple of things together with a torch or with a
Yeah,
laser.
yeah,
And so one of the things I was wondering about, because I know in your practice and in many other handmade jewelry people that I've seen, they're using the torch a lot, but in to do all kinds of stuff, but also to attach things together. But here in Bangkok, I haven't really seen very many people with an actual gas torch. Most of the attaching that I've seen has been done with lasers. Is this normal, or is most of the world switched over to lasers, or is that two different jobs?
So usually lasers are really good to tack things together. And then generally following lasering, they'll use a torch to add solder to make the joint strong. Um, there's a combination of things out there that happen. Um, I'd say there's probably a fair mix of both. I do know that some people use lasers to do the whole job. I don't think that's the best way to do it.
Hmm.
I think it's a really good way to hold things together for when you solder on them, to prevent things from moving around on you.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think there's a good mix of both.
Cool. And so somebody had just asked, and this is a great question: how do you get customers to appreciate fabrication, and namely probably all the time and effort that goes into it? How do you have to convince them of that, or do your customers already have an understanding and appreciation of this art?
Yeah, so I mean, with everything, I don't generally market my work for sale to the public. My customers generally, they only buy from me because it's fabricated.
Okay.
And that's really, I don't make that many pieces for it to actually mean much more than that. I imagine, I make 6 pieces a year. If I was making 600 pieces a year, I would probably have to rethink how I'm going to make those pieces. But
Yeah.
at this point, I just have a small group of collectors that buy my stuff, and um, they want handmade stuff.
Yeah. And I wonder, and I don't really have any data to provide for this question, but I wonder, if we think about, the three different images that we just saw of these Renaissance and 18th century guys, um, at that point in time, fabrication was the only way, other than what you were saying, sand casting, but like to get a really fine piece of jewelry, you had to fabricate it. And like everything else in the medieval and Renaissance times, everything that's handmade is very expensive, even textiles and clothes. Like maybe a normal person might only have two or three pieces of clothes in their whole wardrobe. So
Yeah.
considering now that what you're saying, basically you're marketing to a super exclusive and high-end clientele that obviously can't afford it and don't need to be convinced that they need to afford it. I wonder how similar that would be to, like, let's say if you were the jeweler of the King of England in the 1500s or something. I wonder if it's the same, or if things are more expensive actually now.
Well, so there's perspective, right? And we each, from our experiences in life, we each have our own perspective on what this thing is, whether it's gemstones or jewelry or a combination of the two, right? I'll give you an example. So when I was working for Tiffany and Company, I was the director of the Tiffany workshop. There was a line, it's a very famous line called Jean-Michel Schlumberger. He was a designer that was very, say, engaged in the 1950s, 1960s timeframe, and they continue to make his pieces today. Now, when you look at jewelry that's out there, say 99% of it, the value of the piece of jewelry is worth its weight in metal and stones. That's it. When you look at a Schlumberger piece, it holds an intrinsic value as fine art that's above and beyond the value of stones and metal. It's a different thing. And generally, the people that buy it, they're not buying it necessarily as a piece of jewelry that they would even wear. They're buying it as a piece of fine art. Hence, that justifies the price of over, say, beyond its cost of material, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That when I hand fabricate a piece, plus I do a micro painting of it, the full rendering and color and scale and that whole thing. And then I walk through, the hand making piece of it. Again, it classifies itself as more fine art rather than just a store-bought custom piece of jewelry,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah. And so were the Schlumberger pieces they were fabricated by hand as well?
Not all of them, but most of the parts were. It really depends on what it was. If the shape is, say, organic, they used cast pieces back in the 1950s as well. So it's however it was made originally is continued.
Okay. And so when we're talking about intrinsic value, basically what you're saying is the time that goes into it. Well, I mean, of course we understand the time that goes into it adds value to it, but is there more than just that? I mean, do you think because of the fact that we've already established that it's going to last longer, and also it's
Yeah.
probably had more thought put into it because it's such a more elaborate piece?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there's two different ways that, different angles I could say that you could approach this, right? So one is, again, the relativity. When we look at the pearl piece or really any of the pieces that I do, the difference between the value of the stones themselves are so far beyond any work that I do. It almost doesn't matter, you know.
Okay.
There's a emerald. There's also, you have an emerald piece, I think, that in the slideshow as well. But so I'll
Yeah.
explain it a little bit clearer once we go there.
No,
But
I can pull it up. Hold on, let me share
sure.
that one. I lost my buttons here. So yeah, the emerald piece is here. Okay.
All right. So this piece, this took a month to make. It was 160 hours to make it. The center stone is a 12 karat Brazilian emerald. Just amazing, amazing quality Brazilian emerald. Out of this piece was like 320,000. And I think, if you looked at the actual fabricating of the piece, maybe 40,000 of that was the piece. or 50,000 was the piece. There's no difference to that buyer. That buyer, between those prices, it's not as big of a gap as what you might think. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't, it's very small of a difference.
Yeah. It sounds big when you're
Center,
dealing with common things, but when you get up to that level, it's like, yeah, 300, 350, you know, throw in the
it's not.
extra. Yeah.
So the other thing is perspective, right? So I touched on this a little bit. You know, the most expensive piece of fine art ever to be auctioned at auction was the Fabergé collection. Malcolm Forbes wrote about it, and it was the proudest experience of his life to pay the most amount of money ever for the Fabergé collection. He was not proud or happy to buy the Fabergé collection at a cheap deal. None of these collectors want a cheap deal, because when they actually purchase pieces of that level, they're actually creating the value of it.
Yeah.
That is the value of it. When he bought it for whatever that amount of money was, he created the value of that collection. And then eventually he ended up selling it to a Russian billionaire, you know, some years later. But it's a really important thing, especially for people that are in the jewelry business and in the jewelry industry, to understand what the high-end collectors actually want and what they are thinking about when they buy it. The absolute last thing that they want is a cheap piece. They want the most valuable piece and the highest quality piece that their money can buy. And it's a really, really important point.
Yeah. You're not the first person to tell me a story like that. I was speaking to a guy in Switzerland who does jewelry and watches, and they're sort of some of the top craftsmen in the Geneva area, and he was telling me the same thing. Actually, it was also a Tiffany story. He was telling me, you know, this family came into Tiffany's in New York and said, you know, we want to make an exclusive set of watches for our family. That's basically a way for me to put, you know, so much money into the value of the watch so that my kids can, you know, basically flip them in the future whenever they want to get some of the investment back. And so Tiffany
Yeah.
flew this family out to Geneva to meet with this dude from Bunter. And the guy from Bunter was like, okay, here's what we have to do. First of all, each watch is going to be $1 million. And the guy was like, why? And he's like, because you set the value at $1 million, it's already at this exclusive high level. So when you go to resell it, that's where, you know what I mean? That's where it started at. Can only go up from there. And it's, you know, It's like a psychological thing. It's crazy. And, you know, and the guy ended up doing it. Like he totally sold him on this thing. And he was like, you know, we're going to make these 5 one-of-a-kind watches that are going to be super, you know, whatever. The craftsmanship is at the top level. But it was just like, psychology at that point, which to me it kind of blew my mind, you know. So and you're saying the same thing, really. It's just like at that point it's about something more than just the materials.
I mean, you know, when you look at the people that are buying these things, you know, for instance, this emerald pendant specifically, I mean, we're not talking about stupid people that are wasting their money on these things. We're talking about the savviest business people on planet Earth.
Yeah.
The absolute smartest investors on the planet are buying this stuff. It's very, very important to realize the difference between a number that's on a piece of paper that's in a bank and a physical, real object of value. And this is generally the idea of this, the value that people perceive these things as. It's passed down from generation to generation. And it's usually in the form of, you know, metal bullion, you know, gold, silver, platinum, gemstones, fine art, real estate, you know, real hard assets. And usually the rarest commodities on planet Earth are what holds the highest values in this category.
Yeah. And so basically this is kind of a cool way to say, like, you know, this is what $350,000 looks like in real life. You know, like if you could hold it in your hand, this is what it looks like. Somebody had asked, do you get nervous about setting a stone with such value like this?
Emeralds, yes. Opals, yes. I've generally everything else. Emeralds, I've said enough of them that I'm fine. I'm fine with them now. But actually, so maybe 10 years ago, I decided that I'm not setting any more stones like this. That I'm going to make some kind of screws or fixtures so that they can be removable.
Okay. So that kind of makes them a little bit more user friendly down the line if they need repaired or
Yeah,
whatever.
if you ever need to work on them, sure.
And so does that idea also come from the fact that you've spent so much time on this, and to actually unset it in the normal way would kind of be damaging your work a little bit, or is that not having to do with that?
Well, so there's two things that I see. There's an emerald ring that I made recently where it was a heavy bezel around an incredible no oil emerald.
Hmm.
Um, if I was going to set it, that means that I would have to hammer the metal on top of the stone. If I ever needed to size the ring later, I would have to destroy the ring to take the emeralds out. And in cutting the bezel off of the ring, there is a risk of damaging the stone.
Mm.
So from my perspective, if you're going to go through all of this trouble to hand make a piece, why would you put it at risk to have to destroy it later? So what I did was I created a frame on the top so that on the inside it's fastened by screws. It looks exactly like it was bezel set. You can't tell that it's not bezel set. And you just take two screws out from the bottom, you take the top off, and then the stones come out, you can size the ring and put the stones back in. Now, I'm not going to do this for, say, 2-carat garnet earrings, that are, certain, but anything over a certain is and a certain value, I'm not going to give them any just because it doesn't,
Yeah,
in my
you're
mind.
gonna make some special exceptions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked, do you have like a special insurance to be able to sit comfortably work on these types of things?
No, there is no insurance that exists that I know of. Now that being said, I'm not using other people's stones. I'm using my own stones. I'm using my own metal, my own stuff. If they break, then I eat it. I'm not, I don't take commissions generally. I invest in stones, I invest in metal, and then I just build whatever I want to build and I sell it.
Okay.
I have had things, problems in the past occur, and that's just a part of life.
Yeah.
Just don't do it again.
Yeah. A couple people had asked, do you sign your pieces?
I do. J Fava.
Okay. So you got a little mark in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Cool. What did I want to just ask you? Oh yeah, I was thinking about this before when you were talking about Tiffany. How much overlap did your fabricating skill have to do with your job with Tiffany? Like, are they doing much hand fabricating, or it wasn't related?
It's a good question. So I joined Tiffany um, as the person that was designing their their training system for stone setters, diamond setters specifically. And I did that for 2 years. And then from there, I got to know, say, senior management a little bit more. They got to, they saw my work, they saw the stuff that I was doing, and there was an opening in New York. So I was transferred to New York. I was promoted. And then at, in that studio, you got to realize there's only 18 people in the studio. And out of those 18, I think 16 are actual, craftspeople. It's a very small team. And for the most part, they only really create the Blue Book collections each year.
Okay.
It's like 300 pieces a year, in this tiny workshop. It's very exclusive, arguably one of the most exclusive jewelry studios in the world.
Okay.
They work on these 300 pieces, and it was my job to take the images from design, the renderings, and then figure out, how many hours they were going to take to build each piece and who was going to work on which aspects of them. Now, in the Tiffany workshop, everyone is a specialist. Stone setters set stones. Sometimes even some stone setters only set color, and others only set, diamond melee and diamonds. And then you have jewelers. Some of the jewelers only did rings. Some of the jewelers did, pendants and necklaces. It wasn't very diverse. Everyone was kind of a specialist in their field. And because I had, such a broad, say, education on it and experience in it, it was a good fit for me to spend time, with that team and kind of coordinating, these things. And then from there, they gave me the title of Director of Process Development Technology, as well as Master Craftsman. So I had both, and that was more in designing and building factories in different countries and weird stuff.
And then and since then you've gone on to continue teaching, right? That's a big part of what you're doing now. Besides this hand building, you're teaching a lot, right?
I teach hand engraving. I teach hand engraving. I started making some videos along with my pieces, and I'm kind of starting to dive more and more into that. I hope to publish some books.
And so, we haven't really talked anything about engraving yet. We talked a lot about fabricating, but we really didn't say anything about the engraving. So let me just pull up a couple of photos here. Again, ones that I've just grabbed off your website. And you can tell us a little bit about what that means and how you got into it. So
sure.
This, just tell us about this. This is, to me, one of the most impressive things that I've seen that you've done. And I know that must be a cool story behind it.
Yeah, this is a 1,000-hour project. This was my first really, really big gun project of this magnitude. I worked on it on and off for about 3 years. It's got roughly 5 ounces of 24 karat gold in it. It's all hammer and chisel and sculpted. Took a tremendous amount of time to do. And on the bottom, there's a scene of an eagle, flying through sun rays. This is interesting. So I'll tell you a story. So my first 5 years in jewelry, I grew up in my family's jewelry store, and my first apprenticeship, lasted about 5 years. I finished, and that was just fabrication and metal and jewelry work in general. When I finished that, I started a stone setting apprenticeship, where I got into, prongs and channel and bead and pave, which led me to finding what gravers are. With gravers, I got to a point where, my dad's eyes weren't very good, and he was really the only one that could really do bead and pave setting. So I decided I was going to take a class in San Francisco. And while I was there, a dear friend that I was staying with, she said, there's this great hand engraving guy, in the same building that I'm taking this class at, and should take you and meet him. And I was like, cool. At the time, you had to realize I didn't know anything about hand engraving. I didn't know how it was done. I didn't know if it was done with a hammer. I didn't know if it was rolled on with a mill grain tool or something stamped. I didn't fully understand what it was.
Yeah.
So I meet this guy, and granted, this guy is a 5th generation Armenian master, amazing guy, Harac Nargisian, guy that to this day I still look up to greatly. So when I saw what he was doing, I was like, wow, this guy is amazing. So he told me about a class that he was teaching in Virginia Beach, and I took it. About 6 months later, I sucked. I was terrible at engraving at that first one. I ended up taking it a second time because I was so bad. And then from there, I fell in love with it. Carving metal just became, I was obsessed. I would work my jewelry job all day. I would finish work at 6. I'd go home, eat dinner, and then I'd sit in the basement all night until like 2 a.m. and just practice cuts that Harac taught me over and over and over again for like 2 years. And while I was doing this, I was seeing all these amazing knives and guns. And I don't know anything about guns. I'm not a gun guy necessarily. It just so happens to be the canvas that people commission this amazing artwork to be done on. Mm-hmm. So as I started learning about it, I started learning about these guys, these people in Italy, and other people in America, and just kind of followed that down the rabbit hole. And eventually I got my 3rd apprenticeship. It was 2.5 years in Michigan. And that guy studied in Italy, and he went every year, 1 or 2 times a year. And for me, that sealed the deal. I quit my job. I packed up my 1966 Mustang, my clothes and my tools, and I moved to Michigan. And that was it. I engraved guns and knives at that point. And the other thing to realize is as I was apprenticing, when I went from fabrication and jewelry work, and I moved to stone setting and did that, at each stage, it was with the idea that I wasn't going to do the stage before anymore. I was leaving one career to start a different career.
Okay.
I became an engraver with the whole idea I wasn't going to do jewelry anymore, which is really weird to me when I look back on it, but that's what was in my mind at the time. And now, after I did that for a certain number of years, when I left, I started teaching again. I started teaching full time at that point. But then the idea was to start combining the techniques, all three from all three different disciplines, kind of into one, and kind of trying to make my own style. And that was kind of where it spiraled out of control, if you will.
Okay. And we can even see that a little bit in that emerald piece, right? Because that one has a bit of, let me share that one again. That one has a bit of, well, obviously it's fabricated, but we can see that the gold leaves are,
They're all hand chased and sculpted.
yeah. And so this gold piece, this started as one. This is one piece of gold that's carved.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just started as a piece of sheet. So in the bottom left, you can see there's three pictures of the bale. The top left picture of the bale is completely plain with just lines on it.
Uh-huh.
And then you have the one to the right that's got the holes drilled into it.
Yeah.
And then you have the bottom left-hand picture where it's fully sculpted. And then, of course, the one that you see in the photo. But all of that was just solid sheet metal that was chased, micro chased and reposade. And then I even went in and put little tiny diamond berries. I think there were 0.7s, diamond berries in the ring.
And so micro chase means you're chasing inside of with a microscope.
Just tiny, yeah.
Wow. So somebody just asked a perfect question for you. Somebody wants to learn engraving. They've already bought their gravers. They're going to hand sharpen them. What's your advice for starting? Could you recommend a book or possibly a DVD video series? I added the last.
Okay, so the first question that I would have is, are you a jeweler already, just trying to add ornamental hand engraving to your jewelry that you're already doing? Or are you trying to engrave guns and knives? They're very different paths, I would say. So if you're going to be a jeweler and you're going to add ornaments to it, I would recommend that there are a few books out there. There's The Art of Engraving by James B. Meek. Sam Alfano has a whole series of engraving videos that are really, really good. I also have a 4-part DVD series that's very specific to just bright cut jewelry ornamental engraving. And with that, in a few months, if you practice, dedicated and you're disciplined to do it every day, a few hours a day, in 3 months or so, you could have quality, say, saleable quality leaf patterns and maybe some scroll patterns in, say, 3 months or so. If you want to engrave guns, steel, instead of 3 months, it becomes 3 years. That's the difference in the timeline.
She said she's starting as a jeweler, so maybe she's still she'll be in the 3-month realm for precious metals.
Yeah.
But so if people want to, so yeah, you have that video online. People can download this. It's like a distance class type thing.
Rio Grande has. Yeah, Rio Grande has an instant download for it. I think it's 6.5 hours, something like that, 6 hours.
And basically, you go through a lot of different exercises for making all the different shapes. And if you just sit there with the DVD and go along with it, you're gonna learn what you need to learn, right?
So to break it down, when you look at antique jewelry patterns on, say, watches and, the stuff that we were talking about earlier, die struck rings with, leaves and ornaments on them. Generally what it is, it's a series of cuts, and then you take those series of cuts and you arrange them and rearrange them into different patterns. The way that I teach is I teach, a series of 3 or 4 cuts, then I show you 6 or 8 or 10 patterns using those cuts, and then I teach you another series of cuts, and then I teach you another 6 or 8 or 10 patterns with those cuts and revolving.
And so once you have like your toolbox of cuts built up, you can kind of put them together and do all kinds of different things, make different designs,
Yeah,
whatever you want to do.
exactly. And even if you get, say you get an antique engagement ring in, you can actually decode the cuts that are done on the engagement ring if you're going to build, say, a matching wedding band,
Okay.
or if you're going to recut it, or make it restoration type work.
So once you
It all becomes,
understand, sorry, once you understand how to form the different shapes, you can basically look at a new one and say, oh, I can understand how to make that.
yeah,
Okay. And I had one more engraved piece. So I don't have the entire for this shotgun. For anyone that can't tell, what we're looking at right now is this really awesome shotgun. And I don't know if there was a picture of the entire gun, but I just picked a couple close-ups just to be able to really show the
yeah.
three-dimensional details that are happening here. But I have another one as well of a watch, which is maybe something a little bit more relatable. Um, so tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about this watch.
So this is an all stainless watch. The engraving on it is deep chased and sculpted, and I put a 24 karat background. I inlaid 24 karat gold into the background and put a beaded finish on it.
Okay.
This was just something that I had in my mind that I really wanted to do. So I bought the watch and just had at it. You can see on the end of the crown, I also inlaid
Yeah.
the TCO into it. Um, just simple pattern. But it changed the whole look of the watch from shiny polished steel to, a sculpted and chased scroll ornamental design.
And so did you do this while you were working at Tiffany?
I did on my spare time.
Do
It was
they,
kind of like my hobby.
yeah. Well, what do they think about that? Do you think that the original company thinks it's cool for people to take their stuff and redo it, or what do you think?
So I could tell you that, I mean, my boss was the senior vice president, and the divisional vice president. So when I finished it, they were all very excited to see it. As I was doing it, I was showing them process pictures and stuff like that. So, I mean, they saw it. I wasn't doing it for sale. This
Yeah.
was my own personal watch, you know? Um, yeah, I just did it because I loved it.
Okay. So yeah, I guess they don't have any say over what people do in their own free time anyway.
No,
Um,
if I made a brand and I was selling, dozens of these things, yeah, they would probably not. They'd probably frown upon that a little bit.
yeah. Somebody asked, can you engrave on platinum or just gold, steel, and silver?
So yeah, I engrave platinum a lot. It's a different feel than stainless steel or steel. Um, in some ways, the styles are different. So bright cut ornamental jewelry engraving is done with, say, it's when you take a graver and you flare the cuts and make these bright cut patterns. When you work in steel, steel is more of, it's a much harder metal, and you're more of chipping away at, say, cut lines or actually sculpted forms, which is what you see in the picture.
Hmm. Cool. So you were saying, I like what you were saying before, as you kind of got kind of towards the end of your story, saying, once you had done your 3 apprenticeships and you were kind of thinking about how to combine all of these different styles together to make something of your own flavor, right? Like
Mhm.
engraving and fabricating and whatever, which as of course what we saw on really all your pieces, right? I mean, especially this one where we can
Yeah.
see that you've used all those things together. But I kind of want to take that backwards in time a little bit and talk about how does that idea and specifically the techniques that you use in order to create a piece like this, for instance, how does that relate to, let's say, go back to those Renaissance guys and what they were doing? Is it the same in terms of what they're actually making, what they're able to make with those techniques, or are you at a higher level because we're in the future and the techniques have evolved?
I think definitely with the examples that you have on the screen, I don't think it's necessarily um, anything as far as level. Like for instance, the piece on the right, at that time, this was this is an extremely detailed and ornate piece for the year that it was made.
Yeah.
Um, and their studios, I mean, granted, they're working. You got to realize they're working to like candlelight. You know,
Yeah.
uh, it's spectacular what they were able to achieve. The bottom left one, it looks like a Egyptian theme, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that the ring splits and opens, like
Yeah,
the two sides can, they don't come apart, but they're sort of interlocked.
yeah. Some rings similar to this flipped upside down and they were like double-sided tops to
Yeah.
them. I mean, the detail in it, the enamel work in it is spectacular. It is hand engraved on the shank as well. It's got some lettering in it that looks. I mean, what year is it from? Do you know?
It's mid 1500s. I don't have the exact year on me right now, but yeah, like let's say
Yeah. So
1560s.
if you engrave those same letters on a cast ring today, 500 years, let's say 20 or 30 years, those letters would not be there.
Okay.
They would be erased.
And so for the piece on the bottom left, when you look at this, can you basically recognize, because what we were just saying, once you know how to do these designs, you can sort of recognize them. When you look at a piece like this, do you pretty much recognize how they did it? And if you wanted to recreate it, is it pretty much within your skill set to do something like this, other than the enameling?
So I mean, just to throw it out there, the picture, it's not. I don't have many pictures. I just have the one that I see. But if you look at the H, serifs on the H were
Hmm.
done with a grape.
Okay.
I can tell by the angle that they were cut at and the V shapes on each side. That was physically cut with a hand graver.
Okay.
Um, I can see that pretty much immediately. I would need to see the piece a little bit closer to figure out what's going on in the motifs, because there's enamel. There's stuff under it that I can't see, and
Yeah.
inside
Yeah.
the little crevices that I can't see. I can tell that the piece on the upper left is a cast piece, and I can tell that because if you look inside the gaps of the head and Simon and the head, yeah, in there, that's cast. Also, that yeah, to the left of your mouse right now, in
Yeah.
between that gold piece and the shank,
Yeah.
yeah, that's all what we call, say, casting skin. Um, I'm 80% sure I would actually need the piece to look at it a little bit closer to give, definitive answer to that, but it's looks very cast to me.
Okay.
Um,
So who knows? Maybe this is actually like a fake Renaissance piece, or you think they were using an old school casting technique?
so they definitely casting has been done in many parts in the world for many thousands of years, and you got to realize that the people making these things, this was alchemy. These guys, had very small shops and very small spaces, and they mix stuff together and click their heels together, and they made magic. That's what this was at this
Yeah.
time. So the people that were casting, they weren't necessarily telling people how they were doing it.
Yeah.
Same thing with fabrication. I mean, all this stuff was magic voodoo in that time frame.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I know even last year I was doing a research project in London where I had to I was going through the old records of the Goldsmiths Guild all the way back until like the 1300s. And consistently, they always refer to basically the practice of goldsmithing as the mystery of goldsmithing. And like
wow.
when you go into your apprenticeship, you're entering the mystery, and once you're
Yeah.
apprenticed, or once you're a master, you're not supposed to reveal, these are literal like life or death secrets that you don't want anyone else to
Hmm.
know, especially because London was full of French jewelers and German jewelers and whatever. They don't want everyone to know exactly how they're doing this stuff. Italian jewelers as well,
Absolutely.
of course. Here's a few more just for fun. The one on the right, this one is awesome. This is, I think this is an early Swiss, French Swiss, um, with just a ton of work. It's a watch on a ring. So that one's really far out. Uh,
I mean, you know, you got to imagine rewinding back to this day. The people that were making this stuff, they were making this stuff for, you know, royalty,
yeah,
and they were unveiling these things as if they were unveiling something magical, you know, like truly magical. Um, and it shows on all the details, even on the, you know, the simplest one in the middle. I
yeah.
mean, there's a lot of parts and components. There's a lot of thought and love and care that was put into that in order to I don't know what's on top of it. I
It's
mean, is
like
it
a, I
a
think it's
dog?
like a deer or something. There must have been a story or a
Yeah,
certain reason why they chose that.
absolutely.
But yeah, that was just one that I pulled out. I have a bunch of photos in my collection that I just refer to, and I just saw that one and thought it was pretty cool to show tonight. But
Yeah.
the the watch, though, to me, this one's just crazy because it's like the altar thing closes and then it flips down and then it's a ring, or you can flip it up and
Yeah.
open and it's a watch and a little altar. So
Yeah.
and then you see all the stones and then whatever, the enameling and everything, just so crazy. And this is
So
also
I mean,
from late 1500s.
to your point, the enamels, right? The enamels, they're fired. We're talking about this. It's not paint; it's glass,
Yeah,
right? So because it's glass, that means the actual metal itself has to be alloyed specifically so it can be fired at a high enough temperature so that the glass melts, but the piece doesn't. And the
no,
number of pieces that are in it, you know, as you said, you know, you got the top, but then there's these other folding doors. They're all enameled.
yeah,
Every piece that's on there had to be hand painted with glass powdered enamels, fired, and then afterwards they had to file off the excess enamel and then assemble all of the parts together and not have them crack or chip or break.
yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
That is magic right there.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of fallen in love with enameling a bit, as I've been doing my gem cutting research and all this stuff. But when I look at modern pieces, this is like a really rare thing. Like even in Bangkok, I've asked around to see, do people do enameling, and pretty much most people say like they don't know about that. I know there are a few people that do it, but is this uncommon in the 21st century or just in Thailand?
Yeah. So most of the people that do enamel in Thailand specifically, they're using basically the equivalent of fingernail polish. It is a paint. The better quality ones, it's a UV cured paint. But the real glass fired enamels. So the issue with enamels is the glass is leaded. The really beautiful, vibrant colors that you see comes from the lead that's in the glass,
Mm,
which is obviously toxic, right?
hmm.
Now, they do have some non-leaded glass, and so I'm telling you all this stuff. I'm not an enameling expert. I just have some information about it. I don't do enameling myself, but I know other people that do. The non-leaded glass that they have, it is pretty good, but it doesn't have the vibrance of and the depth of colors that the original leaded glass has. And that's the stuff that you see on like leaks, where it's like iridescent, amazing, you
Yeah.
know, crazy colors. But that's one of the reasons, because the really good colors are toxic. The other reason is, you know, again, you can't use standard alloys to do it. You have to add other alloys to the metal to make it, like for instance, an 18 karat yellow gold, you have to add more silver into it so it fires at a higher temperature so you can melt the glass before you melt the metal.
Okay.
And that the difference in temperatures, it's not a great distance in temperatures. You can wreck the piece if you're not really careful.
Okay, so you really need
Um,
like the hand of a master and the experience to be able to know the final subtleties. Now, does
yeah.
does this can you do enameling with cast pieces, or is it? It's different for
Green,
fabricating.
18 karat green gold. You can.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and somebody had asked, and I don't know if you'll have the answer for this one, but as we were looking at this other piece and wondering, could it possibly be a modern fake? Do you do you think that there's a lot of modern fakes out there from your experience? I don't. I mean, I know you're not a antique jewelry dealer, so you're not really the right person for that question. But
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that area at all, but I would imagine that there's a lot of recreation. I know in the old, Roman coin rings, there's a lot of recreated pieces. Uh, but this piece in particular, I have no idea
yeah,
how to tell if it's new or if it's old.
I know
Um,
I was speaking with some antique dealers in London and asking them specifically about Renaissance rings, and they were saying, they're because I was asking them the same question. How do you figure out, how do you build up your experience enough to be able to tell a fake or not? And they were saying, we see so little of them in the market anyway. Like it's so rare for an antiques dealer to get a ring that's from the Renaissance. But
right.
it seems like most of those people have studied them enough, whether that be in their own hands or in museums or whatever. But they didn't really have any good advice for me as a person trying to learn. It was just like, become an antiques dealer and you'll figure it out. But
Yeah.
not too helpful.
I
Um,
don't think there were, today there's literally millions of people making jewelry. At that time, I don't think there was that many, right? So
yeah.
if you had 20 shops in Venice, so to speak, each shop in Venice, they all have their own little kind of signature style. And I would imagine if you're an expert in that realm, you know where the pieces came from, sort of,
Yeah.
sometimes. And if not, whatever that signature style would be.
Yeah. Somebody asked another question, and I think it's technique related. It's a word that I don't even know how to pronounce, but I'm going to try it, and hopefully you're just going to understand what I mean. They're saying, what about guilloche?
Guilloche?
Oh, guilloche. Okay. Yeah. This is a word I don't know. So you
So
tell me.
guilloche is I mean if it's like engine turning, Rose engine turning, is that what they're referring to? I believe would be
Okay.
the guilloche. That's generally what you see on the dials of watches.
Okay.
There's really cool like psychedelic patterns and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
They're done with antique lathes, either a guilloche line machine, or a Rose engine machine. I don't actually do either, but I love both.
Okay.
If you look at like if you look at really fine Swiss watches, they'll have this like psychedelic pattern that's kind of not an etch a sketch. Those like drawing gyroscopic
Oh
things
yeah.
that make like those crazy patterns. You put a pen in it and
Spiral
different color
graph, right?
markers. Yeah, it does that, except with a graver,
Oh, cool.
and it makes these incredible patterns. Um, Now, I don't. I know that you can buy the machines. I've seen them. I've thought about buying them. I don't know what I would use them for. For instance, the Schlumberger, or not Schlumberger, the Fabergé eggs underneath of those really amazing enamels, they're all completely guillocheed with a straight line guilloche machine.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I can visualize what you're saying now. And somebody did just pop up in the comments and define that. So yeah, they're exactly talking about that. Also called a rose engine lathe. So that's what
yeah.
they meant. So cool.
Now I can sort of fake it with gravers, but not. I couldn't do it mathematically on a watch dial,
Yeah.
that where, it's a full mathematical pattern that's perfect.
Hmm.
Um, but I can do checkering with my gravers in certain areas and fake it, like I said. But that's, yeah,
So
as far as that goes.
when it comes to your pieces, because you just said the word perfect, and that just kind of brought this up in my mind. How concerned are you with perfection and making something perfect, or is that for you not the goal?
Um, it's definitely something that over the years I thought about a lot, and I struggled to get to a certain level of, say, quality standards. But I think at this point in time, I've been intimately inside of, some of the largest and highest ends, say, jewelers out there, and I have a pretty definitive idea as to what their quality standards are. For me, I don't try to necessarily make things perfect, although defining certain aspects of the pieces as perfectly as I can to show, as say, an example of quality. So when the person picks it up, they know that they're holding a quality piece is really my focus. As far as artistic license, I want hammer marks to be on those little micro chased leaves in the emerald piece that you saw.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it under a 10x eye loop or a microscope, there are little tiny microscopic hammer marks in every single one of those leaves. And I want them there because I want the person, as soon as they pick it up, to know that they're holding a handmade piece and that it's not a catted piece or it's not a cast piece or whatever it might be. It's very, very clear that it's handmade.
Okay.
Now, that being said, the oval is exactly the way it should be. The bezel around the stone is exactly the way that should be. The bead setting that's done on the diamond work is exactly the way that it should be. So there's certain aspects of quality standards that I definitely want to shine through, and certain aspects that I want it definitely to look handmade.
Okay. And that's going to just depend on the feeling that you're trying to give it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to go back to what you said something earlier when you were speaking about, all of the work that you do, and specifically on this piece that you were mentioning, it has to be with a stone that matches, the quality, but also the fact that the stone is actually the centerpiece of the whole experience, and that and financially as well, that it's all about the stone.
Yeah.
And I know one thing that you were saying to me earlier before the talk that I thought was kind of interesting. You said both the metalworking technique that you do and the gem cutting technique that I do they're both sort of subtractive, right? You're starting from this raw thing, whether it's metal or a rough piece. And, kind of to go back and just look at the step by step here, we can see you've taken the rough metal or whatever, the raw metal, you've shaped it, cut it, this and that. And in the same way with the gemstone, we take them rough and we're able to go through all these different steps where, you refine the shape, you add the facets, you do the polishing the bottom, and then you can go from the same kind of a labor intensive experience.
Exactly.
But I wonder though, if we were just to loosely compare the process of fabricating a piece of metal and hand cutting a stone, of course you're talking about thousands of hours. And for us, or at least for me, I dread these long-term things. I like to get them done in a couple of days, really. So, but I wonder, for the fine piece, of course, this is just a piece of amethyst, just pictures I had for another class. But if we're talking about fine stones, where we will spend a lot of time looking at the stone, looking at the rough, trying to understand where's the color at, where's the best angle, how are we going to get the good yield. I wonder how that works compared to the process that you have, which you don't really have to think about the quality of your gold necessarily, right? Like that the gold is
Right.
good. You're thinking more about what you're imbuing into it.
So the comparison that I would make, the picture that you have on the right compared to the picture that you had on the left, the picture on the right, you took away everything from the picture on the left that wasn't the finished stone.
Yeah.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If I make a shank of a ring, I forge out a piece of square stock, I turn it into a donut. And then I take a file and I take away everything that's not the shank.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same exact thing that you're doing here, except you're taking everything away that's not the finished gemstone. Is the same thing that I'm doing on a shank,
Yeah.
so to speak.
A question just popped up. This one was for me, actually. Do I ever feel like a butcher when cutting a beautiful rough, or rather like a sculptor who is removing unnecessary stuff to reveal the shape you have in mind? That's a good question. And when you were just speaking about that, it was kind of making me think about like, like imagining like Michelangelo carving David out of that giant piece of marble that, he did. And obviously he had a vision in his mind, way more sculptural than what I was thinking about with this piece, or even maybe what you're thinking about when you have your metal, you're sculpting your metal. But
Yeah.
no, I never really felt like a butcher. I mean, I think about it as enhancing, So it's like, I mean, if you look at that piece on the left, yeah, it's a beautiful crystal. It's clean. It had a really great color, and it had a naturally beautiful, clean face on the front, which is what ended up becoming the table. But when you move the piece around and you look at it, I don't know, they both have a different kind of beauty, and we are seeing a lot of people now using rough stones in jewelry without cutting them at all, which I think is really cool. But as a cutter, of course, like, we think about how can we enhance the natural beauty. And I'm sure same with you want to work with really, really fine stones. You don't want to spend a
Yeah.
thousand hours on the metal that's going to go on this specific stone. It's not matching. And same for us.
Yeah.
We're not going to spend a long time looking at a piece of amethyst like this, because this is really just a normal piece of amethyst. It's not unnecessarily special. But for the
Yeah.
really special pieces, like, we will sit and think about them more. We'll take, especially because we want to keep the good weight and also the color. So we have to think a little bit about, how we're going to hand shape it, and then what kind of pattern we're going to use, what's going to enhance the color the best. Yeah. So how does that play into your psychology for, actually taking the finished stone and figuring out how are you going to accentuate that with metal? Because to me, that's such a, when I see my own stones in a finished jewelry, to me, it's totally altered. And I think they look more
Yeah.
beautiful in the metal.
There is something that happens for sure. And so for me, I'll buy a stone. I always start with the stone. And sometimes I sit on them for years. And I look at it and I try to imagine, what am I going to do with it? Is it a ring? Do I imagine it in a pendant? Do I imagine a bracelet or earrings? Like, what do I imagine it to be? And then I kind of start from there. And then eventually start scribbling ideas down on paper as they come to me. But I think probably one of the key differences is there's, I guess, for certain stone types, the bottoms of the stones have to either be fatter or less fat based on saturation and size, maybe,
Yeah.
where I don't have to deal with that necessarily in metal. I do have some minimum standards of thicknesses that you need in order to have, say, structural ability. But to circle back to what you were saying, I do think something happens when you set a stone right, it wakes it up. It's
Yeah.
like it changes the whole, I don't know, aura of what it looks like. And I guess the best way I can describe it is it wakes it up if it's displayed properly. It
Yeah.
can ruin it too, you know?
Yeah, true. I mean, if you have a sloppy setting or whatever, and the stone's not straight, or just everything's not fitting together, it can be really ugly.
Yeah.
In some way, it's a little bit, I don't want to diminish at all the work of the goldsmith, but it is a little bit similar to, like, when you think about the really, really old Renaissance paintings, and like the frame that they put them in is quite huge and ornate as well.
Yeah.
And different frame can give a different feeling. A big frame with a dark uh, tint can give a different feeling than, like, for instance, the painting you have behind you, which is bright and
Yeah.
kind of light colored and thin.
It's the
So
same exact concept.
yeah.
Same exact concept. I'm essentially a framer for your painting.
Yeah. And I have to make sure that I do something worthy of the frame as well. So yeah, it works good together. I mean, I think it's a good idea. I don't think that a lot of people think that way, though. And I think historically, I know it's not true. I mean, I know it is true, because as I've been going through some of these historical records of goldsmiths, they totally, like, look down upon the lapidaries for every era of history. Like, when I go through the London stuff specifically, because that's what I've recently looked at, like, they're almost like have scorn for the gem cutters. Like, they think it's just crap, and
Really?
it's all about the gold for them. I mean, maybe it's just
Hmm.
their training, right? Like it's all about
Interesting.
the gold. It's the mystery of the goldsmiths. That's their special. technique.
Hmm.
And France was the same, actually. Legally in France, in Paris specifically, like the goldsmith was the person who had the license to be the merchant, right? Like if you're a goldsmith, like for instance, if it was you and me in a partnership, you could have a shop and sell your jewelry. Me as the gem cutter, I couldn't do that. It was legally not allowed for me to have a shop and sell jewelry with my stones. I would have to work with you, and I'd have to be your sidekick in order for us to have a
Oh
partnership
wow.
in that way. Like France was very, and I think London was the same. I'm still figuring that out, but they didn't have the, because it was all about who had the royal charter, right? Who was allowed to, basically who
Hmm.
could have a company, and lapidaries were not allowed to have companies. It was, I don't, why. I don't know why.
Oh wow.
I think it was because the goldsmiths had more weight with the government, because they were loaning the government money throughout all of the Renaissance. Like all of the
Interesting.
Renaissance wars were funded by goldsmiths and churches, I think too. But
Wow.
I know for sure
Hmm.
in England, like Henry VIII was borrowing money from goldsmiths all the time to do all
Oh
kinds of
wow.
stuff. So goldsmiths have always been super powerful, and even today, though
Interesting.
I don't know if it's the same. I don't think it's the same, but you know,
Hmm.
obviously you're doing impressive, powerful work. You're not necessarily loaning money to the king, though, as far as I know.
No, haven't loaned money to any kings yet.
Well, you never know. It's not too late. You're just new in Thailand, so you can work your way up.
Give me some time.
Somebody had asked again. This one's talking about stone cutting. Somebody had asked, are there certain styles that can help a stone's color appear more brilliant or deeper in saturation or tone? Yes, that's definitely true. And I mean, if we go back to this, let me just share that picture again. Basically, if we want to just super simplify the idea of gem cutting stylistically, there's two cuts, right? There's brilliant and there's step cut. I mean, that's super oversimplified, but just to go back to this picture, this one is a step cut on the top, a step cut on the bottom. So it's kind of like an emerald cut with a funky outline shape. And the reason why you would do that, and specifically why they do it with emeralds, it brings out the color. It doesn't really bring out sparkle at all. And when you look at an emerald, it's not really sparkly. They're not really known to be sparkly. And even when you look at a diamond that has this sort of emerald cut, they're not like sparkly, scintillated, flashy looks. They actually give you like what I consider as like blinking blocks, like an emerald cut in a diamond. They flash these black rectangles on and off, versus like a round brilliant, which is like super twinkly and sparkly. So same with colored stones. When we want to, for instance, when you're talking about a ruby or a sapphire, you almost always see them with step cut bottoms, because that's the cut that's going to bring out the color. It's also the cut that's going to be able to like let you follow the shape of the rough, as opposed to a brilliant, which is always going to be like a super harsh V-shaped bottom, and you're going to lose more weight. So it's pretty rare to find a ruby or a sapphire with a brilliant cut. There are people that do them now, especially in America, but like in Thailand, you'll never find a ruby cutter doing brilliant cuts, partially because of the weight, but partially because, if you take a red ruby and you lose some saturation, you might make it pink. And then suddenly your red ruby is now a pink sapphire. And that's totally a different value. With the lab report's going to say a different thing. So yeah, there's a big thing. And when I'm teaching people about gem cutting, this is part of our class. We want to talk about how do different cuts affect color. And this is a project that I'm working on now for an advanced class, where we want to look at every different type of cut in the same stone color and say, okay, the brilliant cut did this, the princess cut did this, the Portuguese cut did this. And really scientifically, it's kind of, for me, it's cool. And I think other people obviously are asking the same question. Consumers don't really know about this. This is like something we haven't told them yet. I'm not sure if jewelers really know about this, but I know about this.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
so, going back to the idea of stones and setting stones for you, is stone setting a special skill outside of just fabricating, or doing
Yes.
the, like, this is something that you have
So
to learn separately?
yeah, and not only is it different, but even setting diamonds compared to setting color are completely different. So setting diamonds, everything in Melly, it's all to certain much closer, say, tolerances, thicknesses, size ranges, that type of thing. When you go from that to color, the ranges of color dimensionally are much, much different. Not only that, how different colored stones can be handled are completely different. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, the amethyst, if you take that to a polishing wheel, you'll round the facet junctions. You don't have to worry about that in diamond. If you take an emerald, it can't go in the ultrasonic. So you have to make sure the piece is clean before you put the emerald in it. And then after you polish the prong tips on the emerald, you have to figure out how to clean it without putting it in ultrasonic or anything hot, because it's thermally, say, um, dangerous, if you
Yeah.
will. Uh,
And so it,
there's
is
just
that,
depending on.
sorry, I want to interject. Is that knowledge transmitted to you through your apprenticeship, or is you get that through experience?
So some of it through experience, some of it through apprenticeship, and some of it from books. There's a great book for jewelers out there. It's by a guy named Arthur Spratovitz, and it's basically working with colored gemstones. What gemstones can take what um, different process steps and treatments.
Okay. And so somebody just asked, from your experience, what's the best way to clean a piece that does have emerald in it? How do you do it?
A soft toothbrush and lukewarm water and soap, a degreaser, some sort of a degreasing soap.
Okay. Good to know.
Now, when I set them, generally I cut and prepare all my seats. I polish it finished. And the very last thing that I do is I hold it with either soft leather or in a glove. I put the stone in it. I fin it and I close the prongs with a soft jaw pliers, like some kind of plastic lined pliers, and just close the prongs enough to tighten it. And then hopefully there's no marks, there's no mars, there's no anything on it, and I can just call it done.
Yeah.
That's the ideal scenario.
Have you ever broken a stone in the setting process?
I've broken many stones in the setting process,
Well, hopefully
but
not.
nothing,
Yeah.
nothing, say, super substantial.
Okay. So, so if, for all of us out there that are getting jewelry made, if somebody breaks one of our stones, it can happen to anybody. If it's happening to you, then it can happen maybe to anybody.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
The 175th anniversary of Tiffany and Company. So tanzanite was one of the stones that I think that they brought to market.
Mm-hmm.
They had 175 carat tanzanite, and the master setter, who is amazing, he broke it. Now, that being said, there's a difference between breaking a stone and chipping a stone.
Yeah.
So if you just slightly chip a corner, it's very easy, essentially to send to someone like you to fix. This guy, when he broke that tanzanite, he broke it. There was no recutting it.
Okay. It was pieces.
It was 175 carat stone that you could probably cut like 3 10-carat stones out of afterwards.
And so what do? They have to try to find a replacement?
Yeah.
And they were able to do that?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that was lucky. But yeah,
It's
bad
a
day
big
for
chunk
them,
of
I guess. It's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And so somebody was asking again about pearls. Yeah, we showed you, or you showed us that other piece with the 3 pearls in it. But so what's the special care for dealing with pearls? Because of course those can get scratched on the surface, right?
So in a necklace, you don't really have to worry about scratching so much as you do a bracelet or a ring. Bracelets and rings take abrasions. There's not a lot of abrasion happening on earrings or a necklace, if you will. They don't come in contact with a lot of things. But that being said, you have to be careful of perfumes, skin creams, and chemicals, because all pearls they're porous. They're natural substance.
Yeah.
So you have to worry about the chemicals, whatever, hairsprays and perfumes and lotions and anything along those lines. You have to be very, very careful with. I would say do all that stuff first, and the very last thing you do before you walk out the door is put on your pearls.
Yeah. And then, but when it comes to the actual setting and doing the jewelry work, I just wanted to pull this one back up because you had those those four awesome pearls in there. When you
Yeah.
actually, I mean, I know you said that for this one, you made a special screw thing so that you wouldn't have to set them in a normal way. But when you do set a normal pearl, however you do set them, do you have to do some special precautions in terms of flame or scratching it or whatever?
Yeah, so they can't take any kind of heat. They can't take any kind of abrasion. So this, if you look at the picture on the bottom left,
Mm-hmm.
is back. That's the back of the piece.
Okay.
There's three trap doors that you're looking at,
Yeah. One,
essentially,
two,
that
three.
click close, and then a screw fastens that trap door
Okay. So
closed.
it's kind of holding it on both sides like this.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
okay. So
Um,
it's pretty clever.
so there was no setting process. It was fastening them into place gently. And if I ever need to work on them, I take out the three screws, I open up the trap doors, the pearls drop out, I do whatever I want, and then I can put them back in. But no, definitely do not ever take any kind of heat to pearls, chemicals to pearls. Um, most commercial jewelry out there, they're generally they're drilled and they're epoxied, into place. They're
Okay.
generally not set. You can prong set pearls and you can bezel set pearls, but after you bezel set a pearl, you can't take it out. If you try to cut the bezel off, you're going to cut into the pearl.
Okay. So it's done. You just leave it after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I feel like we're getting towards the end of this thing. Somebody had just asked, actually two different people asked, can you repeat some of the books that you said? And I'm going to type them into the chat if you tell them to me so that people can look these up wherever they get their books. Some of the ones that have been helpful
Um,
for you.
the engraving ones.
Yeah, or you just mentioned one like a couple minutes ago about
Yeah.
the
So
working with the gems.
Yeah, so Arthur used to work for GIA. He's a former employee of GIA in California. And his name is Arthur Skradovitz. I can't spell it.
Okay, I'm just gonna
Um,
guess scrap of it. So do it phonetically. And what's the book called?
yeah, it's working with colored gemstones.
Okay, I'm gonna write this into the chat for anybody, and then you're gonna have to Google it and figure out if my spelling is totally wrong.
I think it's Skratovitz.
Oh, scrap of it.
And
Okay.
there's a W in there somewhere.
Oh, wow. I'm just gonna write. Oh, someone typed it for me. Okay, it was totally not what I was writing. Okay, I'm gonna put this
You
into the
can
chat.
find it on Amazon pretty easy
Okay, I
and
think, yeah,
online.
working with color gemstones, you type it in. Okay, and then
Yeah.
what were some of the other ones that you recommend that for
So
like
there's
fabrication setting?
So there's no, there isn't anything on fabrication that I've found, or setting there are some videos, setting guides on some settings that Blaine Lewis uh, published. One is the art of setting princess stones, and one is bezel and flush setting. Those two videos are really good. I don't know any books that are any good that I've seen. Generally, the math is off. Uh, the Art of Engraving by James B. Meek was one of the engraving books. Um,
James
also,
B.
the
Neat.
Meek, Meek.
Okay, and what else?
Uh, the what is it? The Hand Engraver's Manual is a small paperback book that you can buy for literally like $5 or something, but it's great. It's a really cool, cheap book that shows you a lot of old school engraving stuff.
Okay, and then what's the name of your video, the one that you have on Rio Grande?
Ornamental hand engraving
Ornamental hand.
by Jason Marchiafava.
Okay, so all those things are now in the chat so people can copy and paste them so they won't have to try and figure out. what you said later. Um,
Cool.
okay. Well, this has been a super informative chat. We haven't talked to anybody about jewelry on here before, so this is something totally new, and I'm happy that we could talk to you, someone who knows obviously so much about it and all the different, ways that it can be. I'm not sure how many people could look at the Renaissance photos and just name them, name all the different tools as you did. So yeah, it was
Thank you,
cool.
man. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and thanks to all of our guests for hanging out with us and asking different questions. Let me share our final slide of the night, just so if you guys want to find Jason online, he's got a website, jfava.com, or his Instagram or his YouTube. And the YouTube has the trailer for your instructional video, right?
It does.
Cool. And then, yeah, if you want to find me, of course, I hope maybe you know me already, and the school as well. So I think no one knows this yet because we haven't announced it, but Jason and I worked together last year on a video that's going to come out soon for IGT. That's basically, it's a gemstone cutting instructional video. So Jason filmed it. I was the teacher, and it's getting edited right now somewhere in the world. I don't know where, but hopefully it's going to be out in a couple of months. It's been a while since we made it, but we've been working on it. So yeah, look for that, and definitely check out Jason's videos. I haven't seen the whole thing, but the trailer looks cool. If I was a hand engraver or a jeweler, I would get your videos, but I'm a gem cutter, so it's
Thank
not that helpful for me.
you.
So, and yeah, so as I said before, we're doing this every Sunday. I've got the next month of guests lined up already. And a week from today, we're going to have Laura Phyllis from Australia, Tatum Gems. If you're following her on Instagram, she's an awesome gem cutter. We're going to be talking about designing funky cuts in gems, and kind of how we approach that. So I don't know that the timing is going to be different next week because she's in Australia. So we're going to have to do this one a bit earlier because it's already way too late in Australia right now.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's what's coming up next Sunday. So again, Jason, thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing some stories and some pictures, and your wisdom, of course.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, everyone, for listening to me babble on about stuff.
Yeah, it's cool.
Um,
We don't often get to hear the story behind the piece. Even looking at your website, we can see all these cool photos, but we don't know, you
yeah.
know, I mean, I wouldn't have known that piece with the pearls was 1,000 hours. I mean, to me, I just don't know. I just see it as a cool piece of jewelry. So it's good to have a context of why something is so special and why it's so rare, right? Because there's not so many people that are willing to sit down for 1,000 hours and do something singularly.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, good
Awesome.
luck and stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Stay
Thank you.
isolated. We're sort of getting back to normal here in Thailand, but not yet. So, um,
Appreciate it, man. It's great.
okay. Well, thanks to
Thank you.
everybody, and signing off. See you guys also Wednesday with Vincent. We've got our other talk series on Wednesdays, Field Gemology Talk. So hopefully I'll see all you guys on Wednesday, talking with Chris Hood in Tasmania about sapphires. So, okay, Wednesday, Sunday. Catch you guys later. Thanks, Jason. See you around.
Thank you.